You know, I wondered, is it just me, or are things getting worse in this world more quickly, more rapidly? I mean, I'm not apparently the only one, right, that is feeling this. I look back on my own childhood, and I grew up in, some may remember these, they're in history books now, the 1950s and the 1960s. And that was the time during which we had this thing called the Cold War was going on. You know, we had these drills in school where every now and then, everybody would have to duck and cover under their desks, which was really not going to be very useful anyway, but if something happened. But we had those, and in fact, this was a concern because at that time, we had this enemy across the ocean called the Soviet Union, and the words that were discussed were mutually assured destruction. MAD was the word that was used. The place was close to mad at that point. And there were times during those years, as some of you may remember, the Cuban Missile Crisis and some other things, that the doomsday clock, if you've ever heard of that, began to move a little closer to midnight. And I think I just heard, in fact, this week that that clock has advanced once again. There was a famous book that was on my shelf that I read as a young boy during this time that really worried me. Perhaps you've heard of the book. It was called Thinking About the Unthinkable. And it was by Herman Kahn. It was a book about thermonuclear war. And it was a frightening thought. Here I was, a young guy and pretty new to the world, and just kind of growing up, looking ahead and reading a book about things that could happen that was very frightening. But I remember this particular thing, because I was told, in amongst all of that, by the way, China is working on the bomb too. But don't worry about that so much, because it'll be still 10 to 20 years before they have missiles that can reach us. So that ought to just put your mind at ease. I think that's what the thought was there. And it didn't, I thought about that and I said, really? That's going to put my mind at ease? I don't think so. Now, since then, as time has moved on, things have been changing. And as you are well aware, I'm sure, that anti-Semitism is on the rise in this world, more so than it's ever been, and particularly in Europe. The statistics validate that more people are now making aliyah. These are Jewish people. Aliyah means to go up. And these are people who are moving from wherever they live, whatever countries they live, to Israel. And they're being invited there. Of course, the countries are welcoming Jewish people to come settle there. And this has now last year hit a 10-year high in the number of people who had made aliyah to Israel. More than 26,000 people from all over the world made aliyah in 2014. And it's interesting to see where they came from. That's a 33% increase in just 1 year. A 33% increase from the previous year. France, by the way, topped the list. 7,000 people moved there from France and 6,000 from the Ukraine. They were only 2,000 the year before, in 2013. So you can see how these numbers are increasing. And by the way, those two together, just those two nations alone, comprise half of the total aliyah, the group that made aliyah last year. And I want to show you a picture that may surprise you. This is a group of people who are protesting in Paris, supporting the Palestinians during the Gaza war. You remember in July and August of 2014, it lasted about 2 months during that time frame. And as you can see who are gathered here. And the symbol at the center of the picture of the anti-Semitic feeling that has already risen only a mere 70 years after the end of the last Holocaust. We now have that appearing again. A Jewish elementary school principal, I came across this, I want to share with you. A Jewish elementary school principal and mother of 3 living in Berlin, Germany, said for the first time in her life, and she grew up there, the first time in her life, she felt afraid of living in Germany. She goes on to say her mother asked her to stop wearing her Star of David around her neck, a family heirloom from her grandmother's bar mitzvah. You can imagine what is going through the hearts and minds. Just an example, there are untold numbers I could share with you. This is a quote that she was interviewed and said, "We have always felt the latent anti-Semitism here in Berlin. We have always felt that." Interesting that ever since the war, it really hasn't disappeared. But what we have experienced in recent weeks and days, not only in Germany but across Europe, is a prevailing mood of outward anti-Jewish sentiment in the street. This is not just latent now, it's becoming flagrant, it's becoming in your face. There's an article that was written back in 2002, a Boston Globe article written by a Jewish columnist named Jeff Jacoby. And he wrote back in 2002 that Israel has become not just the canary in the coal mine, and everybody I hope is familiar with that example, the thought that they used to put canaries in coal mines, and if there was gas that was leaking out, then the canary would be the first to notice it and collapse and fall down, and then the miners would have an opportunity to exit as quickly as possible, lest the whole thing blow up. So that was where the canary in the coal mine came from. Israel has become not the canary in the coal mine, but the canary in the coal mine of civilization. When the Jewish people become the objects of savagery and hate, it means that the air has been poisoned and an explosion is soon to come. If Europeans don't rise up and turn against the Jew haters, it's only a matter of time until the Jew haters rise up and turn against them. And note that this was written by a gentleman living in Boston at the time, actually working for the Boston Globe. And he recognized what was going on in Europe. Very interesting observation. That was in 2002. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has also been on the rise here in America. And in fact, it's especially on the rise lately on our college campuses. And I'd like to ask Chris if you would kindly turn the lights down, because I want to share a video that absolutely will shock you if you're not aware of this. I know, because I felt it shocked me when I first saw it. So prepare yourselves. It's only about 5 minutes.
I would have never said a year ago that this would happen on my campus. 30-something% Jews, proud Jews, Zionists, such strong Jewish and Israel community, pro-Israel communities. This would never happen. It happened. People were being, verbally, maliciously attacked for saying, I believe in the right to a state of Israel. The anti-Israel sentiment has only escalated. The campus is going to become more and more polarized.
Things have just gotten a lot crazier and more negative on campus.
The negativity and the loudness, the abrasiveness on campus make it difficult for me to be open about supporting Israel.
I think a lot of students feel harassed and uncomfortable in their own living situation.
I don't think it's acceptable criticism of Israel when Israel becomes villainized, when Israel becomes the big bad devil.
You see these pamphlets that depict Jews with hooked noses and sucking children's blood, and I think that is classic anti-Semitism.
Students for Justice in Palestine hold an event called Israel Apartheid Week, where they lie about Israel for a week in a way that demonizes the state of Israel.
There's people who are pretending to be soldiers at checkpoints.
Filthy Arab, an Israeli life is worth more than all of you combined.
They were having a die-in, which is students lying, kind of pretending to be dead in the middle of campus. They're kind of trying to intimidate and frighten people on campus.
If we just look at the issues that people are focusing on, human rights issues in general, these are issues that are not even on par with the human rights violations that are happening in so many other places in the world.
The vote of 20 to 12 to 1 that passes.
Pro-Israel students who spoke at the Central Student Government vote faced threats from various groups.
All of these disparaging insults, accompanied by threats of violence, are messages that I and other members of Central Student Government have been receiving this past week.
Students were also called dirty Jews, things like this. Especially those on Central Student Government were called on the phone saying, "We know where you live, like vote with us or else."
To say that this is a non-violent, peaceful movement, I would seriously disagree, especially with the number of emails and harassing texts and harassing voicemails and harassing calls that have caused me to miss class for a week.
When there are times with high pressure, like during this divestment vote, students are definitely intimidated. A lot of the pro-Palestinian students were screaming and just very offensive towards the pro-Israel students who spoke at the meeting.
It's a little bit scary because I kind of never know how students will react to my pro-Israel sentiment. Even openly talking with other students on campus and professors especially.
So we can say this, and Hamas is a terrorist organization, sure. They also do great healthcare and kindergartens. Hamas doesn't recognize Israel. So what?
You see it in Columbia, Saliba, Khalidi, Masad. They're all tenured professors, and they're all expressing their very anti-Israel and distorted views on the students.
As a student, the power dynamics are there. I feel powerless in a sense and very intimidated that these figures of authority and academic knowledge are basically invalidating everything I support.
They will stage a walkout, in some cases even curse at the speaker. They're notorious for doing this.
My only purpose today is that this event is shut down.
Johnny Garber speaks for Israeli apartheid. Johnny Garber speaks for Israeli apartheid. And genocide at the hands of the IDF.
It sounds like it was a very specific thing that happened nationally. They had their very specific script that they were reading from a piece of paper about how Noni Darwish supports Israeli apartheid. It's nationally organized. It's not something that students came up with at UNM.
They're not saying, let's have these borders. They're saying, let's have all of Israel gone. Israel has no right to exist.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.
What it essentially means is that from the river, meaning the Jordan River, to the sea, meaning the Mediterranean Sea, Palestine will be free, meaning all of Israel, as it currently exists, will be dissolved, and in its place will be a Palestinian state.
Kind of scary. I don't know if how many people here are aware that that's what's been going on, and it's been growing. A number of you are nodding your heads, you are aware, but some of you may not have been. It's getting worse, and it's getting worse very quickly. I want to share with you just a few notes about that. This boycott, divest, and sanctions, the BDS, which is what BDS stands for, and divestment resolutions have just been passed by students. Here's a list of them just since 2012, so it's in the last couple of years or so. And UC Irvine, these are the students now. The students passed this. UC Irvine, UC San Diego, UC Berkeley, UC Riverside, UCLA, UC Davis. All of these have passed, by students have passed anti-Israel resolutions, which is just, you know, of all of those on there, the one that hits me the hardest is UCLA, right in Westwood. Can you imagine? I mean, what could be more of a Jewish neighborhood than Westwood, where UCLA is, for them to pass that? It's unbelievable. The UC Davis, there was a video on what happened at UC Davis. I shared that with some people. It's absolutely frightening what happened there. On February 8th, 2015, the UC Student Association, which represents hundreds of thousands of students on the entire University of California, they voted 9-1 to call on the UC regents to divest. You see, it's not up to them, it's up to the regents of the University of California to make that decision. But look at the strength of the effort to divest from Israel. Now, they have not voted. The regents have not, fortunately, agreed to this, but it just shows you what's going on the college campuses. Perhaps we should revise Mr. Jacoby's warning and make it read, if Americans don't rise up and turn against the Jew haters, it is only a matter of time, and maybe not much, until the Jew haters rise up and turn against them. Now, what does all of this have to do with Purim, you might ask? Well, more than might at first, I don't know, maybe familiar with Purim, you would understand. But just to review very, very quickly, in 483, roughly BCE, in ancient Persia, Jewish lives were put at risk, as you know. And Haman passed a decree on the 13th of Adar, all the people in the entire empire of Persia, which, by the way, spanned from India on the east, the Indus River, all the way to the Mediterranean, part of southern Africa as well, northern Africa. It was an amazing amount of, it was the largest empire in history, the Persian Empire was at that time. And so it included the land of Israel as we know it. And if they were going to kill all the Jews in that empire, guess what? That would be all the Jews that probably were, for the most part. Mordecai, of course, heard about the decree, and he went to Esther. And Esther went to the king, who was the highest political leader in the world at that time, and that was the world, pretty much. And Haman's plan was stopped. Haman was hung, Mordecai was honored, and the Jewish deaths were averted. Out of that whole thing, a celebration ensued, which we call Purim. Recently, a much more virulent anti-Semitism has been growing in, of all places, modern-day Persia. We know it as Iran. At the 2005 World Without Zionism, can you imagine that? A conference, a World Without Zionism, maybe you can, in Tehran, 2005, the then president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, said, the Zionist regime that is a usurper and illegitimate regime and a cancerous tumor should be wiped off the map. They later tried to revise that and say that, oh, that's not what he meant, that you don't understand the translation. But that is what he meant. On November 8th, 2014, just 3-4 months ago, the current Iranian supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, said this barbaric, wolf-like, and infanticidal regime of Israel, which spares no crime, has no cure but to be annihilated. Iran is rapidly developing nuclear weapons. Anyone who says anything else is not dealing with reality. Today, once again, Jewish lives are at risk. Benjamin Netanyahu has become the modern-day Esther. That's good news, but let's keep going. He's been watching Iran work to develop the bomb. Lots of information about what's going on behind the scenes, much more than you and I are getting in our news. And so, Mr. Netanyahu went to the highest political leader in the world, the current president of the United States, and asking for help to stop the plan. Kind of like Esther went to the highest political leader. But this time the president refused to even hear him. So on March 3rd, the story's not over. So on March 3rd, 2015, Mr. Netanyahu spoke to a joint session of the U.S. Congress. Now, how many of you listened to that and heard it live? Wow, I'd say 80% at least of you watched that. I know I did as well. I sat and hung on every word. He spoke to a joint session of the Congress, and some of the things that he said really touched my heart, and I'm sure yours as well. I've picked a few samples. Today, he said, the Jewish people face another attempt by another Persian potentate to destroy us. He had recognized that Purim was just a couple of days after his speech. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, spews the oldest hatred that Israel must be destroyed. And he went on to say, but I can guarantee you this. The days when the Jewish people remain passive in the face of genocidal enemies, those days are over. We are no longer scattered among the nations, powerless to defend ourselves. We restored our sovereignty in our ancient home, and the soldiers who defend our home have boundless courage, he said. For the first time in 100 generations, we, the Jewish people, can defend ourselves. This is why, as a Prime Minister of Israel, I can promise you one more thing. One more thing, he said. Even if Israel has to stand alone, which it looks very much like they might have to, even if Israel has to stand alone, Israel will stand. Now, as he closed, he said, facing me right up there in the gallery, overlooking all of us in this august chamber, is the image of Moses. That's the image he was pointing to, the image of Moses. Moses, he said, led our people from slavery to the gates of the promised land. A very touching way to summarize what had happened. Of course, we all are familiar with that. And then he continued, and before the people of Israel entered the land of Israel, Moses gave us a message that has steeled our resolve for thousands of years. And he said, I leave you with his message today. And he read this quote from Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 6. Be strong and resolute. Neither fear nor dread them. And that was a very moving biblical thought I found. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this week's Torah portion. Some of you read through it each week, and it's great. In this week's Torah portion, which is actually the portion, it's called Ki Tisa, when you count. But in this portion is the golden calf episode. Everybody knows about the golden calf episode. What's happening here? Something? I think it seems like it's out of control here. All right, let me go back to where it was. I don't understand. Somebody, is there somebody sitting on one of these things? Okay, so in this week's Torah portion, the golden calf episode, in which, of course, the nation made this, had Aaron make the golden calf, and that whole scenario is fascinating study and has some very subtle parts to it, I might add. But in that portion, in Exodus chapter 33, which is, it's actually in 32 is the golden calf, 33, where the comments are starting to come in, and God did not look with favor on what the nation had done. The irony shouldn't be lost that while Moses is up on the mountain receiving the commandments of the Lord, the people are down breaking the commandment, the first commandment, shall have no other God. They built this God that they could see because Moses was up on the mountain too long for them. And what's fascinating about that whole parsha is that Moses begged God to forgive them. That his heart was for his people, despite the evil that they had done. And God told Moses, you know what? Get out of my way here. I will destroy all of them, and from you I will make a great nation. And Moses argued with God, says, please don't do that. Think of what the countries around us will say if they find out that you brought supposedly your people out and then destroyed them and then they died in the desert. That's not something that will speak well of you, of your name. And he begged God to forgive them and to continue to be with them. And it was very interesting what God's response was. I will not go with you. You take them to the promised land. I am not going with you. And Moses said, but Lord, you have to go with us. And he said, if I am with this nation one more moment, I will destroy them in my anger. And Moses said, without you, blot my name out if you don't go with us. And I noted in this quote that Netanyahu put up there, you may have noticed, it's only part of the verse. The rest of the verse is very telling. The part that Netanyahu left out. See, the rest of the verse says, for the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not fail you, nor forsake you. It's as interesting the verse that he chose as the part that he left out. Because in all that we read and all the stirring emotion that Israel will stand, that Israel can defend itself, that Israel has brave soldiers, that even if we stand alone, we shall stand. And all of that, part of my heart, and I hope part of yours, thought to yourself, not by yourself you won't stand very well. And the very verse he chose, Netanyahu left out the fact that the reason that they can be resolute, that they can neither fear nor dread them, is because the Lord your God is the one who goes with you. He will not fail you nor forsake you. And when I thought about this whole thing, it just kind of all came together for me. Because you see, God is the essence of the holiday called Purim that we celebrate. Without God, there would have been no victory to celebrate. Without God's hand defending Israel, there will be no victory. So I'd like to ask everyone to join me as we close to pray for the leaders in Israel, beginning with Netanyahu and the others, to recognize their dependence, indeed their need for God. Because without Him, there will be no victory. Join me and let's pray. Our gracious and loving and faithful Heavenly Father, without you, Lord, we are nothing. You are the creator and the sustainer of all life. Without you, there is no victory to look forward to. Father, we lift up the leaders of Israel, all of them, Lord. May they be stirred in their hearts and minds to turn to you.